It was 1993, and I was kind of going through a big transition in my life. I was a junior in college, and the years of middle school to the current at that time, I had started a lawn business with one of my best friends that I grew up with in the Williams Bay. And I was starting a internship at a publisher that year, and over time I had been able to accumulate some equipment and some accounts, and I wound up selling these accounts and equipment to people who wanted them. And I had this little sum of money. It really wasn't much, but I was very proud of the accomplishment of being able to do that. And I'm still a watch guy, but I was even a bigger watch guy back then. And to celebrate my accomplishments, I bought myself a Seiko chronograph stainless steel watch, which back then, a Seiko was like a really big deal. Now, it's not so much anymore. But the rest of the money, I went to an investment broker that my dad used. He was an older guy, had been in the business for probably 30 years. And so we went into this office, and he had all these knickknacks and pictures and all these little pencil holders. And the one thing that I remember the most was he had this radiator cap from like a 1915 or 20 like Model T. And I just thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And it was this huge metal thing right on his desk. And, here I'm thinking I know everything, and, of course I didn't. And he said basically to me, he said, "Kris, everyone thinks money is the most valuable asset that you have. But it's actually not. It's time. Money can be spent and lost, but you can always gain it back. Once time is gone, it's gone. You can't get it back." And, when he said that to me, I'm thinking, whatever. I have my whole life ahead of me. I'm going to be finishing college. I'm going to start a new job. And so I bought some pharmaceutical stock, and I got the certificate, and I thought I was like, this really big deal back then. And I just filed it away, and I just forgot about it. The thing that I find so fascinating about the Bible is there are people who lived 2,000 years ago, and despite us being separated by time and technology, the struggles, the emptiness, the hurts, the longings stay the same. Just because our technology is so advanced compared to what they had during Jesus' day doesn't mean that we're any better off. In some ways, we're actually worse off. And Jesus exemplifies time management like no other person in the Bible. Of course, he's the Son of God, but people I think sometimes we forget that he was a human being who felt pain, disappointment, was burned by people, and yet we're like, well, he was still the Son of God. Yes, that is true, but he still hurt. And he dealt with the things that we deal with today. In Matthew, there are 3 points that I want to highlight about Jesus, and these are really terrific stories about how Jesus managed time. You would think that he would be a person who would be like, any person who needs help, let me help them, and let me just do what I need to do to get as many people saved as possible. But you know what? That wasn't the case. You would think that. But it really wasn't how he operated. He needed rest. He needed prayer. And he also realized that he had to take action when action was needed. Sometimes he got upset. Sometimes he had to take some of the disciples by the heads and clunk them together, like, hey, let's make some better decisions. And he was also burned by a lot of people too, people who were closest to him. If you have your Bible, if you could open up to Matthew 4, 1 through 11, and we're going to be talking about the first item, which is prayer. Jesus is in the wilderness, and he's famished. And the story goes like this: And Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." And Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and said, "Stand on the highest point of the temple. If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up on their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against the stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." And again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I've done for you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." And Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and the angels came and attended him. I know that I've said this in other messages, but it always rings true. If you had one of those old-fashioned scales, like you see Lady Justice who's blindfolded, and you go to a courtroom and she's holding it up, and you've got the two metal trays that hold something in them to weigh what's going to happen. If you could put your physical body on one of those trays and your spiritual body is going to far outweigh the physical. We are far more spiritual beings than we are physical. But yet we focus on the physical far more than the spiritual. There are things that are going on behind the scenes, strings that are being pulled in your life, politically, that we can't see. But God tells us very specifically they are very real, they are very powerful, and the war that we wage is not a physical war, but it is a war of prayer. Strongholds, dark strongholds that we can't see. I'm a part of a prison ministry on Thursday nights, and I go and I pray with men who have had a whole host of issues in their lives. Some of these people are predators. Some of them have issues with drug and alcohol. Some of them have had horrible upbringings. And what happens is you start peeling away the layers of these guys that you pray with and you start talking to, and you realize that the drugs and the alcohol and the behavior isn't really the issue. It's the symptom of the issue. But we tend to look at it from a physical standpoint, like they're, horrible, or they belong in jail. And you know what? Some of them do. There's no doubt about it. Some of them, I'm really glad they're in jail, because I would not want those people on the street. But the truth is that it's a spiritual sickness. And when these guys start to figure that out, and they're like, wow, I've never heard that before, that totally changes my whole paradigm on how I think, and that person who abused me and that addiction that I went through, you realize that really no one wakes up one morning and says, hey, I want to become an alcoholic, or I want to be a drug addict, or I want to be addicted to opioids or heroin. No one does that. But from a spiritual standpoint, Jesus is par on with this. Satan is sitting there focusing on physical kingdoms. Here he's saying, I've prepared all this for you. He didn't prepare anything. Satan is just roaming this thing for a specific period of time, and he knows, with Jesus being there, that his time is up. Once he dies and rose again, he knows that his time is finished. And he was trying to prevent that, but of course he didn't. Jesus' focus is on the spiritual. He's telling them, look, I don't need the bread, I don't need the kingdoms, I don't need the mountains. I'm the God of angel armies that has a spiritual aspect to it that, Satan, you can't even touch. And you're focusing on the physical. As Christians, we tend to kind of hang ourselves spiritually because we wind up focusing on the physical. And look, I'm going to tell you flat out, I am as guilty as anyone else doing it. But it's taken a while for me to really figure out that, you know what? It isn't this physical world. There's no way that we're going to be able to avoid problems the only thing that we can control is how we react to it. And if we go to God and Jesus in the scriptures and pray in a very powerful way, which God promises that he's going to answer us. It may not be the answer we want, but he is there, and he's never going to forsake us. Jesus knew this when he was confronted by Satan, that he had a spiritual force behind him, that no one was going to leave him. The next one is rest. Now, I got to tell you, this is one where I think in our day and age, we are sorely losing the battle with rest. With 24-hour information, news, shifts going three shifts a day. But when you look at Jesus, and a lot of times he'd have these huge crowds following him, and he jumps in a boat and he's like, I'm going to the other side. I need some rest. I need to get my bearings back. And of course his disciples are like, well, but you got all these people, and we got to feed them, and what are we going to do? And Jesus is like, look, I need to kind of chill for a little bit here. If Jesus took rest, do you think we're any better than Jesus to not take rest? We're not. In Matthew 11:25-30, it says, At that time Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, this is what you were pleased to do. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those whom the Son chosen to reveal. Come to me, all you are weary and burdened. I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in spirit and heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So I'm going to ask you something. How many of you would like to have an easier yoke in life? I can tell you I would. We tend to make our own issues, and I will tell you that my family will attest to this, I have many OCD habits. Some of you who know me very well know that I like things in place, and I don't rest until things are done, and I just like things very well managed. But I will tell you that there have been times where Jesus has whispered in my ear and is like, look, just let me have it. Just chill. It's going to be okay. Because a lot of times, the things that we think are going to happen usually don't. And a lot of times they wind up better than we could ever imagine. But this is the key. It doesn't usually happen the way we think it's going to happen. We have timelines and agendas and day planners and Microsoft Outlook with all the calendars and the reminders and the red flags and everything else that you can have. And it is exhausting. This world is not tempered for a spiritually strong life. This world wants to wear you down. The enemy wants to wear you down. And unfortunately, the flesh, our physical beings, are so weak that we just kind of grab right onto it because we don't know what else to do. Because everyone else is doing it, it's expected of us. It is very unusual for us as Christians, and I'm speaking for myself, to take the rest that we actually need. When I was at a job I was at a job for about 16 years, and now I'm at a new job, but I can't tell you how much vacation that I gave up there because it was expected of me to get the job done. And I probably gave up weeks of vacation that I didn't get reimbursed for or anything. And then I remember reading a news article in a business section of CNN, I think it was, a few years ago, where they were talking about record numbers of Americans do not cash in their vacation. Even if they're not paid for it, they still don't do it because of their fear of losing their job or the stigma of taking the vacation. That's a problem. That's a big problem. And I struggle a lot with having quiet time because you get up in the morning, you want to get to work, or you're so exhausted at night. And Jesus is like, look, I need rest. I mean, I'm exhausted. People are exhausting. They are. I'm exhausting, you know. We all have it. And so when I sit there and I think that when Jesus is saying, look, I need to have some time by myself, he really meant it. And I think if he hadn't had it, I don't think his ministry probably would have been as powerful as it could have been. And he's got disciples scurrying around, oh my gosh, we got to do this, and this is falling apart. And Jesus is like, look, it's all good. It's going to come out in the end. The last one is action. Now, this one can be kind of tricky because a lot of times we can over-spiritualize things in our life. We can think, God is calling me to do this. I need to do it. He's opening the doors. He very well could be. But I will tell you, there's been more times than not in my life where I've realized that I don't know if God was really calling me to do something. Because, one, my prayer life wasn't where it was supposed to be, and I wasn't getting the rest that I should have been. My head wasn't very clear. Now, this one is a little bit of a longer passage. You're going to have to bear with me, and you'll see why. Matthew 8:18 through 34. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. Jesus replied, Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Another disciple said to him, Lord, first let me go and bury my father. But Jesus told him, Follow me, and let the dead bury their dead. Then he got into a boat. His disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. He said, You of little faith, why are you so afraid? Then he got up and rebuked the wind, the waves, and was completely calm. And the men were amazed and asked, What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. So when they arrived at the other side in the region of Gardenius, 2 demon-possessed men coming from the tomb met them. They were so violent that no one could pass that way. What do you want with us, Son of God? And so they knew. The demons inside these men knew who Jesus was. They shouted, Have you come to torture us before the appointed time? See, they knew. They knew why he was there. Some distance from a large herd of pigs was feeding. The demons begged Jesus, If you drive us out, send us into the herd of pigs. He said to them, Go. So they came out, went into the pigs. The whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and died in the water. Those tending the pigs ran off, went into the town, and reported all this, including what happened to the demon-possessed men. The whole town went out to Jesus, and when they saw him, they pleaded with him to leave their region. What's so interesting about this story is a lot of times we tend to take action to please ourselves, more than likely others. We want to be liked. We want people to think we're important, valued, whether it's our family, friends, work. Do you not think that perhaps these 2 demon-possessed men in that region probably caused a lot of problems? They were probably very violent. People probably couldn't pass by that way for fear that these men would probably tear them apart or who do something even worse. And, here these people probably heard about Jesus and excited for him to be there. So he heals these 2 men. The demons go out, they go into pigs. Now, I understand that animals back then were a form of currency. I get it. If I had something valuable like that, I don't know if I'd want it walking into an ocean or a lake and all the pigs die. But the fact is Jesus knew You can give people what they want, but they're not going to love you back. Jesus was called to action. He did it. He knew what their reaction was going to be. They told him to get out of town, but he still did it. He didn't do it for the people of that town. He didn't do it for the disciples. He did it because he knew it was the right thing to do. The disciples probably didn't want him getting in the boat. Then the storm comes. He's down in the hold sleeping while everyone's panicking. I probably would have panicked too if I was on a small boat in a big storm. And then he goes and he heals 2 men who were demon-possessed. And my guess is they probably were demon-possessed for quite some time. They probably had quite a reputation. Doesn't really say. But if I had 2 demon-possessed men living by me, yeah, that'd be a concern. The truth is that we are called to action, but a lot of times it is not popular. It is not what we want to do. It's not going to please other people. But God still asks us to do it. The reason why Jesus was able to stay firm in what he did is, 1, his prayer life was in check. He got rest. And he gets up and he's like, look, I'm going to take care of business, even though I know these people are not going to want me here. Oh, well. Time is something that is unbelievably precious. Jesus knew how much time he had left on the earth. He had a very small ministry. He knew it was coming. Excuse me. You would think that he would be spending it 24/7, healing people, saving people, going to towns, dealing with people's problems, but he didn't. He got rest, and he prayed. We don't know how much time we have here. None of us do. But the thing is that we have a Lord who is willing to give us wisdom and insight if we are open to allow him to give it to us. But we have to be open. It's not going to be what we think it's going to be. It's not going to happen the way we think it's going to happen. Now, I know we talked about that stock in the beginning of the message, and I wound up filing this thing away, and I would get a quarterly statement, and I actually just kind of ignored them. I didn't even open the envelope, just threw them in, and so I opened one recently, and now you got to understand, this thing has been growing for 25 years, okay, so it's been growing a while. I set it up so that if there were any dividends, it would just keep buying more and more and more shares. And when I think about what we had gone through during that time, we had gone through some wars, some recessions, practically a depression that we had, 8 years ago. And I open it up and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's worth 6 times what I bought it for 25 years ago. Now, if I had diverted the dividends to something I wanted to buy, or I sold it, I would have missed out on whatever investment that gains would have had. Now, it's not a lot of money, okay, but the fact is that it was focused on one thing. It was focused on that company. And whether the market went up or down, whether there were wars, whether there was political upheaval, elections, didn't matter. It just kept going and going and going and going. That's exactly how life is. You got to dollar cost average your spiritual life, because there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be times you don't want to pray. There's going to be times that you don't want to rest. And there's going to be times you don't want to take action. And sometimes the action we want to take is not the action we should be taking. So when you think about time in your spiritual life, I want you to just think about it as an investment. The highs, the lows, the challenges. If you stay focused on the right thing, It's going to pay off dividends. But you got to stay focused on Christ.